Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today, we beam aboard the USS Callister into infinity from the new season of Black Mirror on Netflix. It's a follow-up to the very popular USS Callister episode, which premiered back in 2017. If you haven't had a chance to check out this thrilling 90-minute sequel, I suggest you do so now, as we will be discussing some spoilers from the film. I say film because that's the way director Toby Haynes describes it. Understandably, as it really feels like a full-length science fiction feature film, which is all the more impressive considering that this was made in a fraction of the time and a fraction of the budget of most Hollywood blockbusters. So how did they pull it off so effectively? Joining me for the conversation today is supervising sound editor Tom Jenkins, visual effects supervisor James McLaughlin, composer Daniel Pemberton, as well as the film's director Toby Haynes. I wanted to start today's conversation with how this episode, or film, came to be. It's the first and only Black Mirror sequel episode, and it was even under consideration to be developed as an independent series. And in the end, it took 7+ years to make it so. Here's director Toby Haynes.
I mean, I think this one was always going to be, it's really tricky when you come back and do a sequel of something. None of us wanted to work on something that was going to be any lesser than the original. And the original is kind of, I mean, speaking for myself, saying it's like the closest thing to kind of like a perfect episode that you could get. It has such a great beginning, middle, and end, and it has such great conclusion. It feels so wrapped up, yet it's still a great sort of launching point into a kind of whole new sort of recognizable world, but it's its own IP. And so I always knew that it had the potential to be a series or, you know, a kind of sequel, or just I knew that I wanted to explore these characters and that world even further. And I think even in my interviews for, you know, the promotion of the first film, I was already trying to sort of drum up interest in a sequel from Charlie. And eventually, you know, there was loads of talk across the years, and even when I was doing Star Wars, he was talking to me about it, and it turned into a series, and it became a shorter series, just 3 episodes, and then it became a one-off film. And this is my favorite version of it because this is a proper movie sequel to what felt like the first real movie episode of Black Mirror, and it's in a sci-fi world, so there are some great precedents for sequels that are a kind of upgrade from the original, you know, if not like better, but certainly on a par, and maybe set their own kind of statement. So you can love both the original and the sequel. And so you've got like Terminator, Terminator 2, Alien, Aliens. The list goes on. There's so many others. Everybody chime in. I don't know, but the
Spider-Man, Spider-Verse 2.
There you go. Exactly. And so, but you know, the dog on my back is that first film. That first film it kind of came out very well. And, I think we were all just scared with every kind of decision, every move that we made that, is it the right move? Is it an upgrade, or is it, you know, going to send us down a rabbit hole that would make this, you know, we just knew there would be a lot of pressure, a lot of people watching, and that people would call us out if it was anything less than fantastic.
I appreciate even that you call them films. You know, you didn't think of them as episodes of a series as you were making them, because they are epic in size and scale. But that you brought up the sequel that is kind of a step up and grander in vision than the original. And I just made a note to myself that it kind of felt to me like a little bit of Star Wars: A New Hope and then Empire Strikes Back. You know, just the sequel that is scaled up in terms of size and impact. So I'd love for you to dig into that a little bit more. What were those conversations that you and Charlie Booker, who is the show creator, had about, like, you know, how to appropriately scale this up and to make it have even bigger impact than the first film?
I think like he really wanted this to be, you know, he talked about it as being the Empire Strikes Back, but actually I think if sequels we're going to talk about it, it would be, he was going to call this, episode 2 Attack of the Clones, which I think would have absolutely been appropriate. But yeah, it was, a lot of the conversation was about just like, how do we upgrade this? How do we kind of, you know, hit the ground running? We don't have to do so much setup in this film, you know, that we can be kind of faster on its feet. I also knew that everybody's like kind of 6 years older and 6 years better. And so like I wanted to expand on what I did in the first film. The whole cast are coming back. They're more experienced. Christian Milioti is like on fire. Jimmy Simpson as well, like, you know, really kind of capitalized on a character that he authored in the first film. And he really wanted to explore some stuff on this one that, you know, and it's just a question of letting them go. And I think even like Stefan, the DOP, came back and he wanted to upgrade the look, and everything was just like, you know, it's Infinity reloaded and upgraded. And and that's what our intention was. And I think that's generally kind of like in terms of kind of aesthetic, that was the new dimension that we wanted to get into. What was the sort of kind of overriding aesthetic for this episode? Because the first film had the kind of classic Star Trek aesthetic to kind of fall back on. This film needed its own identity. And for us, that was gaming.
So Daniel, kind of a similar question for you. What was your process of like taking the original themes that you had developed for the first film in 2017 and refreshing them and kind of bringing them into the new film?
Well, I think the gaming reference by Toby is pretty interesting. And like the first one was like obviously very heavily influenced by sort of 60s Star Trek. And it's sort of interesting, that type of scoring, which is quite triumphant and major key-esque, is sort of like out of fashion. It's kind of the aesthetic of this film is hard to put that on. So we kind of took the main theme. The theme is now a bit more like darker. It goes into a minor key and it's got a bit more robustness to it. And it really was just trying to keep some of the palette. Like there's a lot of sounds in this one, which if you watch the first one, they're instantly recognizable because all the sounds are unique. You know, every project I do, I try and make sounds and motifs and melodies that are unique to that project. So it's really fun to come back into a world and be like, oh, we've actually got all these sounds that are actually quite memorable. And, you know, Toby would always get excited if I put one. I can't really make the noise, but you know what I'm talking about? There's a noise, there's little noises, and you're like, oh yeah, that presses your kind of memory buttons. So it was really like we built the palette in the first one, and this was really about expanding on it. And the scale of this was so much bigger that, you know, I wanted to go a lot bigger with the score. You know, we recorded this one in London. I think it's the first time it's had like Black Mirror's had a big, you know, basically feature film approach to the score in terms of orchestral. You know, we did 70-piece orchestra in London, recorded at Air Studios, you know, a lot of electronics. And it was a big production, and it was exciting to do that scale on something, you know, which is started off as a TV show, and you've now got the scale musically of basically the same as a Hollywood film.
Hey, Alaska, ready the shields, prep the thrusters.
Cheating bottom holes. Already home.
Daniel, it's definitely a trope of the Star Wars kind of musical approach, and I think Star Trek too, that I would describe them as score forward. When I used to run Skywalker Sound, and I think our joke when we were doing a Star Wars film was that if it's 120 minutes, there's at least 118 minutes of music. So tell me a little bit about your process. I mean, did you kind of embark on a similar approach to achieve that kind of same feeling for this?
Yeah, there's two kind of elements, obviously, to this. And one of the things that makes this so exciting but so challenging is you've got these two different worlds. So you have the kind of near future modern world, and then you have this alternate universe. And the alternate universe in some ways is relying heavily on, I don't want to say tropes, but kind of an understanding. We're trying to make it feel like a world that's familiar. And so that I was obviously leaning very heavily on the sort of approach in films like Star Wars, which annoyingly is, any composer will tell you, like the most complicated like thing sort of try and do in a modern TV film composing situation. Because the thing about those films, and the reason you don't get a lot of music in modern films that sounds like John Williams, is A, or John Williams is complete genius, blah, blah, blah. But B, he doesn't really have to constantly rewrite stuff and deal with edits and notes in the way that modern filmmaking is like, oh, we've recut this scene, we've recut this, or we want this, or can you do this? And so one of the things that's been great about working on this is there was a lot of respect for the process. So, you know, I was chatting to Toby and Charlie, being like, these big sequences, if you want them to sound like a sort of big, harmonically complicated piece of music, you can't keep changing the length of it, because I can't just snip it shorter. Because if you've got a piece of music that does that, it's easy to chop into it. But if the music sort of does that harmonically, it's complex. So that, you know, whereas the sort of near future stuff, a lot easier to edit. So it's like we sort of discuss different approaches and different techniques. But another thing I really like that they do in Star Wars a lot, I don't know what you call it, but it's just basically big crescendos that John at the end of a scene, and then you boom, you're into the next scene. So whatever's happening, it's like, it makes it really exciting. You know, if he's just walking down the street, cut, you're into the next scene, and you're like, it propels you into these next scenes. So I try to do that a lot, where we'd have these sort of moments where you just really push the score at the end of a scene, which is basically John Williams' trick, which I've just shamelessly ripped off. For me, I don't often get to, you know, I'm always trying to write scores that feel like, let's say, me. And, you know, it was actually very interesting to enter this different world and write differently in ways that I wouldn't necessarily normally write. And it's fun. You know, you get to be really, you know, you get to play with the orchestra in the way the orchestra should, you get the most out of the orchestra, really.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I made a note to myself when I watched the episode again, how much work the score was doing on the transitions. So it's exactly what you say. Like you built these moments in to kind of carry us into the next sequence. And you got a lot of shifting back and forth between the, you know, the game world and then the real world. So my question to you was, how did you manage to do that, knowing that, you know, how slippery and elusive the editing process is, and how things kept back and forth. But apparently you just forced Toby to not make any picture changes.
When forced, there was definitely some picture changes, but it was like, it's like a process where we would sort of look at the film and would be like, okay, this is complicated. Like, one of the first things I scored were the big space battles, and I started scoring the space battles, and that's one of the first things I did. And I decided what I did was actually not that great, and rescored it, and went back in later, and then it worked a lot better. And by that point, I'd learned a bit more about what I wanted to do. And it's about just working, like, everyone on this project is really good. You know, the sound team were fantastic on this. Normally I'm like, oh no, I can't hear any of the crazy work I've done. But, you know, the sound team also just doing fantastic work alongside the music. And we're all trying to work together and realize that we're all trying to make something special, and we're all on the same side. So I think if everyone understands that, and they understand the complexity for me of, like, I'm not going to be able to make it as good as you want it if you keep messing around with these sequences, but you can mess around with these ones, because that's fine. It's a bit like trading. You're like,
yeah. Well, I think we had a very open kind of door with the edit suite. I mean, what you've got to bear in mind, I mean, I call these films, but I've had this film, by the time Charlie saw it, I'd had it for a week and a half to myself. That's it. And then he sees it. So he sees like an unfinished cut, which is sometimes painful for me. But James is coming in and out of the edit suite. Dan is coming in and out of the edit suite. Tom was coming in and out of the edit suite. Everybody on this call was coming in and out of our edit suite, helping us out with, like, you know, how to sort of fill out the sound. We're trying to we kind of all have to start working on it at the same time in order to sort of, you know, kind of get it delivered on time, and then, you know, to be able to do the kind of extensive post work that needs to be done. But yeah, it was, it's a revolving door of an edit suite, and you just kind of have to you have to fold your ego away somewhat and kind of relinquish to the process, and that everybody trusts each other. There's a huge amount of trust. So I really trust Charlie, and I don't mind him being on the sofa behind me while we're still trying to work out the best way to sort of chart our way through complicated expositional stuff that isn't quite landing. You know, and the same with the action. He'll kind of, you know, lead me to the action kind of stuff, and we hand it back and forth. It was, it is one of I think in terms of my career, it's definitely the most collaborative.
Yeah, and it's definitely a thing where I would hold off on scenes as we go. There might be scenes I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you ideas for this, and I'm going to be able to rewrite them relatively easy. Whereas the things that are going to be very hard to rewrite, like a lot of the space battle stuff, I'm going to sort of kick that can down the road until you feel like you're in a better place. But I think this is probably the most ambitious TV score I've ever done, ever in my life.
Daniel, what you're saying actually makes me want to bring Tom into the conversation. One of the things, Daniel, that I was struck by what you said, you talk about your music as being sounds, which I'm very intrigued by. So, Tom, I would love for you to jump in and tell us a little bit about like your collaboration with Daniel and the score, and like, did you have rough versions of what Daniel was doing as you were building the sound design, and were you working off of that, or did you guys kind of have conversations about who would be doing what as you go through the process?
I mean, we, as Toby said, we were fortunate the whole process was incredibly collaborative, and sort of you're sharing, you've got to be willing to be vulnerable, I think, with it, and share stuff that is, sometimes it's not finished, right? It's good to share work in progresses. So we were sending a lot of sound work to the edit, and we were fortunate that James Ridgway, our mixer, found some time on the stage to go over sequences way before sort of the episode was locked and way before we were pre-mixing. Which gave us a chance to work things out and to get things to the edit, which then could make their way to Daniel. So when he was composing his beautiful music for this, there was some sound there to work to, and we were just incredibly fortunate that Dan, you composed in a way that was so sympathetic to what the sound was doing in the sequences where it needed to be, both things needed to be turned up to 11. So the jungle run, for example, the way you compose the score, it automatically got out the way of the guns, and we knew we could go massive on it because the way you composed was sort of around hit points, and it was just it was a pleasure to mix when you know that things have been kind of working harmoniously before it hits the dub.
Yeah, and it's also like being in the mix. Like we all came down to the mix, and being like, okay, well, what's going to help the story the most here? Like, so sometimes music can really help the story because it tells you an emotion that you can't see on screen, or maybe sound's going to help because it's going to tell you that gunfire is totally lethal, or this thing's about to break, or this is a very cold atmosphere. So because there's collaboration and trust between everyone, which Toby's very good at fostering, we all are like just trying to work out, okay, it's not like, I spent ages on this piece of music, so it should be really loud. It's like, it should be loud here because of X, Y, Z. But this bit, I've tried to put this space so we can have more effects in. And, with the battles, it's like, if they're all music driven, boring. Let's have one that's very music driven. Let's have one that's effects driven, or one moment. And that makes something that's a lot more dynamic and a lot more exciting for the viewer, which is kind of the most important person at the end of the day.
But I think like Dan definitely has an effect on the cut too. I remember even on the first film he'd scored the this was right up until the kind of the dub, I think, and the mix. He'd scored the end moment when they were just like this beautiful kind of piece that sort of twinkles out on a kind of lens flare off the sun or something like that. I can't remember an effect shot that we only just got in, and Dan was like saying you need to sort of pull that out for as long as possible because of the way that it tails off with the audio with the orchestra, and then like make the black space in between that last for as long as possible. It was really kind of it was really informative, and I think that we took that approach throughout the whole kind of thing of the post of this one, making sure that everybody was really across it so that any decent ideas that came up, we had the flexibility to be able to adapt in the moment and be able to, really capitalize on the brilliant work that everybody was doing.
James, I'd love to draw you into the conversation. Daniel was talking about kind of putting off the score work on the final kind of big climactic space battle sequences as long as possible. And my question for you is, like, we've been talking about size and scale on this, and it really does feel like a feature film. Now I'm presuming that you did not have a feature film budget for the visual effects, especially in that. So how did you approach knowing that like the climax kind of had to be this epic space battle, kind of playing itself out around the the heart of infinity and that whole set piece?
What's happening?
The heart's collapsing. What the hell is going on here?
Do it. Fucking do it. Fucking do it.
No! Label your discs, asshole!
I think we saved time and money through collaboration. I think it's really simple. We just got involved in the edit very early. We were very involved on the set, so we knew how, we were building in all of the sort of in-camera elements, so we had a load to edit with there. And then we had a great base with the score, like Daniel was saying. He remembers doing it later. I remember it happening earlier, so maybe but I remember it being this amazing bed, and we could look at shots and we could see the music building, and we would know what we had to hit at what times because we had this sort of musical score sitting underneath that enabled us to visualize, at this moment it makes sense for the explosion to happen earlier or later in the shot or right on the last frame of the shot. So because of that, we had this base with which we could work really soundly into. And so we had a really good previs team at Big Tooth. They created loads of amazing shots on brief. And then we were able to insert those into the edit with Tony and have a play, and Toby would have a look and we'd make some changes, we'd come back, and I think it was just that collaboration, that sort of really quick feedback, backwards, forwards, was what was enabling us to get to the end of, completed elements, whether it's animation or effects or rendering or whatever. We were able to get to those moments really quickly because everybody was in the room.
That thing about feature film budget is important as well, because we didn't have a feature film budget on this. So I'm
not giving away any of the trade secrets. But,
when we did that recording session, it was one of the most intense recording sessions I've ever done because we only had so much time because we were on but basically trying to make Star Wars, we had the budget of not Star Wars. I don't know what the budget, what the equivalent is, but basically, yeah.
We had the Star Wars catering budget, basically. That's what we had.
Star Wars catering.
But you were there. I mean, I was there when Dan was doing the orchestral recording, and it was an insane day. It was fantastic, and amazing or inspiring moment watching him work the audience and orchestra. Getting what he could out of them, with take after take, and then just kind of improving these kind of little tweaks. It was so fascinating. And then Dan was there with me. I remember one of the points where I had 3 camera crews running at the same time, and I was got loads of monitors set up, and I had a bicycle that I was riding from one crew to the other and trying to get it all shot by the end of our schedule, because there was literally, when you did this, like the first time round, there was no wriggle room. We shot the first one in 20 days. We shot this one in 30 days. So yes, it was a bigger scope. It was a bigger film, maybe the biggest scope that Black Mirror's ever had. But in terms of movies, and in terms of the kind of movies that it's being compared to, it's a minuscule budget, literally a minuscule budget. And so when you've got that only that much to play with, you've really got to shoot for the moon, and you better hit it.
I just want to follow up a little bit on the VFX, because I'm so struck by this. So you had several sequences, obviously, where you had multiple clone duplicates who are interacting with each other within the context of the game world, and obviously that's something that we've seen quite a bit. But you had to execute that flawlessly on a pretty tight schedule and budget. Can you talk specifically about that aspect of it, because you had such a high level of interactivity between the clones in the same frame?
Yeah, we used every trick in the book on that one. So we had doubles, so we were dirty over shoulders and stuff. So we had foreground doubles. We had handheld shots where we were shooting handheld plates after the fact. Our camera operators, Ed and Stefan, were doing a fantastic job of getting us clean plates. And then we had the big motion control rig on a Technocrane arm that was carefully sort of slid into the set to give us the room and scope that we needed. Stefan and I went and tested it in a company out in west of London, and what was really nice about that system was Stefan was able to hold the camera over his shoulder, move it, get all the shots that he liked, and then just sort of let go, relinquish the movement, and he came back and it would re-roll and go through the shot again. So we used the whole spectrum of techniques on that one, and I'm pretty proud of what we did. I think that there's one thing that we were super proud of. Jimmy was amazing at hitting his marks when he was playing himself. And there's this beautiful shot where at the monitors we were all ecstatic because he hands a drink to himself in the right spot at the right time. Then we got into the edit, and Kristen, of course, gave a great line to camera. So the camera wasn't on Jimmy, unfortunately, but the actors were doing an amazing job, because we, Toby and all the actors and the camera crew and ourselves, we went to a production studio, mapped it out on the floor, how we were going to do it, who was going to be where at what times, whether Kristen or Jimmy were clone or real, and so I think, again, speaking of the budget, it was that whole process of making sure everybody was in the room and seeing all of the attention that was being put into it to condense this time down to make sure that we were shooting really efficiently. And then, when it came to VFX, it was clean plating and putting it together. And to be honest, we'd shot it so well, I think we were in a pretty good spot from the beginning.
The performances are so good in this, and you've got really you've got a lot of contrast in the characterizations between the game clones and their real world counterparts. But I never once for a second questioned who I was watching, even if they were wearing the same clothes, because of the performances. And so what was your process of working with the actors on getting that kind of amazing differential in what they were doing for each character?
Right. That's awful. That's what you were going to say. Yeah, that is what I was going to say. And I'm so... No, stop. Don't say, I'm sorry. I always used to say that. Don't say that. But I am sorry. I had no idea that this was happening, and well, how could you? I mean, you have been enjoying your life. Or our life, really.
I think this comes under the same thing as said before, whereas everybody's kind of 6 years better. I mean, Kristen's process was much more in depth on this one. She had more to do. She was in more scenes. She carried a lot more of the movie. Jimmy's process, I think he always just had a really clear idea of who the outside version of Walton is and who the inside version is, and especially kind of defined by the fact that the inside version, the in-game version, the clone, has basically gone mad as well, has been sort of marooned and is a little bit crazy. I mean, those were just such wonderful scenes to shoot. Jimmy gives everything, and I really was just like, most of the time what I can do is just reassure them that when they're being as crazy as that it's okay, and that also we're getting truth. Like, you can be big and truthful, you can't be big and phony. So it was just really just making sure that the emotional heart was always played out. I think one interesting example was when we were doing that scene where Nanette first meets herself in the game and she's scrabbling over the rocks and things. We were shooting the kind of Sigourney Weaver version, the clone Nanette, which I based her costume on, Sigourney's from Aliens, and I remember when she was filming it, she kept saying, "There's just something missing from the scene. It just feels a little flat. I'm not sure this is working." And I was like, "It's working so well. The only thing missing from it is you seeing yourself." And that's what I see yourself. I know what you're going to be doing. And then sure enough, when we filmed the other side of it and she's there, kind of can't really believe that she's seeing herself and she's as goofy as she is, it makes absolute sense. And I think we actually had to shoot that almost across, maybe it was just across lunch hour or whatever. It just it felt so far apart. It could have been days apart, but it was actually just an hour or whatever it was. And I was like, no, this makes absolute sense. This is going to work. I think, it was a really fun shoot. Like, it was a really high pressure shoot, but that cast is so kind of reassured, and everybody's kind of capitalizing on the great work that we'd already done. We really knew what the product was. We knew what the kind of film it was. It was really just about making it be as good and as sharp as it could possibly be. And, I was really pleased with what I saw in the edit.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, designing the costume to look like Sigourney Weaver in Alien. And so it made me want to ask you about kind of the stylistic influences. And one of the things that I love about USS Callister Into Infinity is just kind of the joyful tone of it. I feel like you have a lot of Easter eggs in there for fans who want that kind of thing. Even really fun things like, a lens flare. We're paying homage to J.J. Abrams now. That kind of thing. But I feel like you kind of struck this really fine line balance of putting Easter eggs and homages in there, but also not being a slave to it and doing your own thing creatively. So can you talk about kind of finding that balance and sort of like how much was too much and what was, how did you find just the right amount?
Well, if there's anything that interrupts the drama, I mean, I'm always I'm a real, a geek at heart, but a dramatist, in my work. And so like I've become a dramatist in the 20 years I've been working in TV. And so I can't not do what services the story or services the character or services the emotion of the moment. And if I have and that is even played, I've always wanted to be one of those directors that does a really fancy long take or whatever, and just do, wow, look, he did it all in one take or whatever. But I'm always the guy that goes, I want to see that person's reaction. And we can't see it because we're trying to do it all in one shot and it's not quite getting there, and we can't choreograph it or whatever. I would always just cut into the take and get that reaction. So I'm just a bit more kind of functional like that. And I think in terms of Easter eggs, that kind of comes secondary, and it really comes from enthusiasm and love of film. And a lot of films that I've seen have kind of make an emotional imprint on me. And I try and quote them in ways that aren't obvious. So sometimes it's just a shot or a reaction or kind of like, and I'm trying to think of anything from, I mean, to me, like the Sigourney, like some of it was in the looks, like Sigourney with her massive gun. I wanted to do our gaming version of that, so with her in a vaguely Sigourney-like outfit, when she puts the jacket on, you're like, it makes sense, it's Sigourney. And then she's got this massive pink gun. We're subverting the original kind of, aliens look. And I think, kind of Walton dressed as, Tom Hanks from Castaway, but his version of it, but our version, you see more of his ass. It's just, I don't know. I just get a kick out of this shit. And it's like, it amuses me. And I'm just constantly trying to keep myself entertained because I've got a really short attention span.
And you make him do unspeakable things with The Rock as well, which is, that's a good comedic moment.
We never filmed that.
Tom, I feel like you got to have a lot of fun in this because you're building so many different kind of discrete worlds from a sonic perspective. You got the real life office environment, obviously on board the Callister. You've got all the different, Toby handed you a lot of really interesting possibilities with all these different in-game worlds as well. And then, of course, you've got the simulated garage inside the heart of Infinity. So, and I didn't even mention, the Real Housewives of Atlanta you managed to throw in here as well. So I'm just kind of curious about what was your approach? What did you start working on first? Just how you built all these different sonic environments?
I mean, it all started at script stage. So it's the exciting thing with working on Black Mirror is you get these scripts through without actually knowing what the episode is going to be about. And this came through, and because, Toby and Charlie's references were these incredible, canon sci-fi films, but also the gaming world, the approach I took at first was to do things offline, away from picture, to the script, and sort of use like the initial couple weeks I had with the script before we started editing, just to create sounds away from picture and try to kind of do it based off emotion and see if we could come up with anything interesting. And a lot of, those things ended up in the edit, the kind of lightsaber-esque thing in the ice planet at the beginning. That was, I think, it's one of the first sounds that was made just to script, and then that was delivered, and it built from the ground up there.
Bro, where's your boy coming, man? Scotty, I want to get the mission started.
Morris said he'll join when he's had his lasagna.
Yo, someone's coming.
That'll be your mate. Here we go.
He hasn't joined the party.
Hands in the air!
Drop your weapons!
We don't want trouble. We just want your credits.
Who are you? Why don't you have player tags?
Either of you, Morris?
And look, when you get an episode of anything where you can see sound, it's going to be intrinsic in telling the story. It's incredibly exciting. And when that story is space battles, guns, jungle planets, absolutely everything, it's such an inspiring thing to work on. And, I was fortunate that I'm the face of the sound team in this call, but, James Haydale, sound designer, Alex Orodalo, editor, our Foley team at Twickenham, all went above and beyond for this and put an incredible amount of hours into designing everything that we did was bespoke. Everything was recorded. Everything was was given care and was given attention. And it was a great experience.
Yeah. And where'd you end up doing the mix?
The mix was done at Grand Central in Soho.
And is that what was the approach to that? Because obviously it's big in size and scale, but it's going to be streaming. So were you in a 7.1.4 room or
we were in an Atmos room, and we we mixed it as loud as the Netflix spec would allow us to, and made it feel as much of a theatrical mix as we could, given the limitations of home entertainment. And it
felt like we mixed it in a wardrobe. Compared to the new room that they've got, we've done 3 films together. Was this the 4th? No, this was the 3rd film, the 3rd Black Mirror that we've done together, and it was absolutely always in the same room, this tiny room. And literally, when we finished this one, I think they moved into a new.
Yeah, this was the last show that or formerly Picture House did in the old room.
Yeah, and now they've got this new, very deluxe room, which I saw a tour of the other day, which I'm very impressed by, but kind of annoyed that I didn't get to mix it there. But look at the results. I mean, that team is one of the most. It's everybody on this is just the top level people that you need when like I said before, you're shooting for the moon. You can't afford mistakes or to go down rabbit holes that don't lead anywhere, and so. To work with this sound team and to work with this level of, visual effects as well, that had to just work. We got one stab at it. You can't just necessarily go again and again and again. We only had like 4 days of my time in the mix to be able to kind of nail this. I think I saw the final mix had most of the effects in. I think that I saw the final effects when I watched it with an audience. And it was like, wow, yeah, thank you, James. You really handled that. And the sound team were just like, yeah, it was just such a pleasure because people could bring their imaginations to it, and they really understood the piece. And I think it, really showed.
You say you watched it with an audience. Tom, did you end up having to do a theatrical version as well as for Netflix for streaming?
Yeah, so we did a sort of a Black Mirror premiere screening thing at the Central Picture House in London, which has screen 2, screen 1, screen 2. It's an enormous theatrical room. So we had fun doing a theatrical upmix, and it's one of those things where you do that and then you think, why the fuck can't everyone come watch this in the cinema?
It really played. Honestly, it was one of the most humbling and kind of bewildering experiences to watch it on such one of the biggest screens I've ever seen my work shown on was in that theater. The sound lived up to it. The effects absolutely knockout. The sound was incredible. Dan's score was mind blowing at that level. And it just, the way that the episode, I really wanted the episode to leave you on the same kind of beat as we did with the first one, that they kind of escaped. They've kind of achieved what the sort of from the confines of the story, and yet nothing is resolved somehow, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah. Tom, tell me a little bit about what was the approach to Dolby Atmos in the mix?
It's interesting. I think the approach for Atmos over the years has changed from when we first started using it to being really excited about the use of objects and to be able to fly things around the room a little bit, and everyone got that out of their system in the first couple of years and started being a little bit more bespoke with how they're using it, a bit more appropriate. And this is probably the first episode of anything I've done where suddenly we really had that opportunity to use the objects and to use the full frequency speakers and to just be really bold with panning and to be really bold with how we told stories using the speakers and told stories using not just what was on the screen, but being brave to put things off the screen and really create this immersive world. And, that wouldn't have been possible without technically what the Atmos format gives you.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you had so many gifts from Toby in terms of cues that you could have fun with, like, sweeping the Heart of Infinity thing through the overheads. I'm sure you had a lot of fun with that, and I would imagine that you were able to use Atmos to give some separation and distance with Daniel's score as well.
Absolutely, and as I said before, with Dan's score, the incredible thing was you would think with a film like this, you would get to the mix stage and it would be a battle. And it really wasn't. Like it all really, but not to say it was an easy mix, but it all played really well. But having that separation, especially for that sequence you're talking about, it's my favorite sequence of the film when the net sort of beams down to Heart of Infinity and we have this incredible shot of her. James and Toby's just incredible VFX. It was so textured and so visceral that we could attach all this sound to it. Dan's incredible score that, we could, in the sound design, we harmonized with, at every point there were teleporters in the season. We made sure that we were harmonious to it, and the sound of the teleporters were playing at intervals. So you had sort of fifths and sevenths going along with Dan's score. And you have this amazing sort of Steven Spielberg moment of the garage door opening. And it's just it was such a fun sequence to mix. And all of that was made a lot easier, and I think was a lot more visceral and storytelling wise a lot more powerful because of the Atmos format.
James, I wanted to ask you, and we've been talking a little bit about Dolby Atmos, and I've watched this now a couple of times. It looks stunning, streaming on Netflix and Dolby Vision as well. So for you, from a visual effects standpoint, does it affect what you're doing? Does it affect your approach at all, knowing that there's going to be an HDR version and potentially Dolby Vision down the road?
It didn't really change our approach. We were always looking to work into what the camera can achieve. So in terms of light, so we're always looking to achieve visual effects that are able to be color graded or matched into an edit the same as the camera effects are, the camera shots. So when you have real camera versus CGI, hopefully the CGI can be graded as much as the in-camera stuff. So it was really interesting. We weren't able to aim low. We definitely had to have as much to play with for Toby and the color grade as possible. But what was really interesting for me personally, I'm a VFX supervisor. Visual is the key of my job title. The two moments that really blew me away were both sound moments where I went into the mix because I'd been working on all the shots and we'd be using offline audio. Went into the mix and Tom sat me at the front row seats of his screen as he worked, and I was sort of clinging on by my fingernails to what was happening in front of me. And also when we had that amazing viewing in a cinema, I mean, the audio just, you can't separate the two. They have to seamlessly weave together to tell this story. And the audio absolutely blew me away. It was phenomenal to hear it properly, sort of blowing my socks off. And that was super exciting. And I think a lot of the VFX artists who were able to go down and see it were really blown away by the fact that they could see their work. There's teams and teams of artists that we have who've worked on this show. And, some of them were lucky enough to come down, and so many of them came up afterwards and they were like, the work looked great, but oh my God, the sound. Like like you put the two together and everybody's just blown away. So it was phenomenal. And we were lucky a lot of the time to be able to work off the sound as well. As I said a bit earlier, like knowing roughly what the guys were looking to put in, and they'd layer in, and we'd look at a shot and we'd try to bring our A game to it to sort of match to what the guys were doing in sound. So the guys at Union and the whole in-house team run by Josie Hinwood and the vendors that we had all did a fantastic job of trying to basically match into what Tony and Toby and Tom and Daniel were putting in the edit. Every time we'd see it, we'd be like, oh God, we've got to, we got to up the camera, we got to move it faster, we got to explode it bigger. So it was really good because you had these cues. You didn't need to guess. You just had to turn it up to 11,
It is the same for sound, that everything we were seeing looked so good that you have to push the sound team, right? You have to kind of match these incredible visuals. So it is that really satisfying moment in a mix during a review where you watch everything and it's all come together. It all feels intentional. It all feels like it has this sort of, it all feels like it's been created from the same thing.
I think in some ways it was like a kind of blessing and a curse that it wasn't so bound by the kind of pastiching of Star Trek. And I think the original one, we were spending a lot of time trying to get a sound that was close to the right ping sound on the deck of the Callister. And then in this case, what Tom did and what the sound team managed to do was to sort of bring they had a much freer hand in some ways to create a new kind of environment or new kind of place, but it also meant that there was nothing they could really draw upon from the original. So there really was kind of a new soundscape, an ever expansive one. But yeah, I didn't feel like we were rooting around for like individual sounds very much. I feel like I had about 3 notes about like individual sounds for the whole thing, which is kind of amazing when you think about the complexity of it.
That is truly amazing. Yeah, it sounds like a really unprecedented level of teamwork across all the departments on the film, which is, I think it's a testament to you, Toby, because you set that tone and allowed that kind of collaboration.
Well, it is one of the, we talk about this, I talk about them being films, but they are part of an anthology series. And, me and James had already done, and Tom as well, we'd already done the a Bête Noire before we did this film. A lot of people I've worked with, for years, the same, certainly Stefan I've worked with since film school. I collect people. I've worked with Dan as much as possible since I worked with Dan. I like working with the same talented people who've become my friends, and we have a good time when we're working. It's usually, annoyingly, my projects are always high pressure and high delivery standard and kind of no time whatsoever, and quite often very low budget. So we all have to be as creative as we can be, but the good thing is they're always high scope, high ambition, and high octane.
Well said. Well said. Well, final question for you, Toby. I'm hoping that in true kind of Star Wars fashion, that this is envisioned as a trilogy. So I hope we don't have to wait another 8 years for the 3rd installment. Are you cooking something up already, or are you done?
Well, it's interesting. I think the original ending of this film kind of concluded it a lot more than maybe you'd expect. And I was kind of on Charlie's case about, when I read that ending, I was like, you just can't end it like this. It's too trite. I remember using the word trite, and he was like, trite? Someone talked to my wife about trite? He was so annoyed. And then I kind of challenged him to sort of find a way of, they've always got to kind of jump out the frying pan into the fire in a way. And maybe not really realize how fiery the fire is until it sinks in. So yeah, I think there is possibility for another film. I would love to do my own version of a kind of epic sci-fi trilogy. I hope it will be this one. I have my own ideas. I haven't sat down with Charlie yet to talk to him about them yet. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the good thing is we all come off from this film still talking to each other. And that includes the cast. We are all in touch, and I think there would be a lot of goodwill to try and pull something else together. And I love the fact that this is a sequel film, so therefore it deserves a trequel film to come up. What a terrible line to end on.
I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you guys so much for coming on the Dolby podcast today to talk about this extraordinary film, USS Callister Into Infinity. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks so much.
Many thanks to Toby, Tom, James, and Daniel for joining us on the podcast today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Netflix for helping us put this conversation together. Be sure to check out Black Mirror, USS Callister Into Infinity, now streaming in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos on Netflix. We'll have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you are subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.